They called it the buzz saw, a sound that tore through the air like ripping metal, a sound that froze the blood of every man who heard it. In a single second, this weapon could unleash 20 bullets, shredding flesh, bone, and courage all at once. Soldiers swore it could cut a man in half before he even hit the ground. It was not just a machine gun, it was a force of nature, a terror that stalked the battlefield, and a reminder that in war, death could arrive faster than thought itself. This was the MG42, a weapon so perfect that even its creators wondered if it had gone too far. By the early years of the Second World War, armies across the globe still clung to old doctrines. Most nations built their infantry squads around the rifleman. A rifle was steady, personal, and symbolic of a soldier's role on the front line. But in Germany, a different vision took shape. The German High Command believed the control of the battlefield did not come from the individual rifleman. It came from the machine gun. Their first experiment was the MG34, a weapon of remarkable precision and craftsmanship. It could be mounted on a tripod for long-range fire or carried on a bipod for mobility. It was admired as the world's first truly general-purpose machine gun. Yet, in the mud of Russia and the dust of North Africa, its perfection turned against it. The MG34 required delicate parts and skilled labor. It jammed in sand, it faltered in dirt. It was too fine, too fragile, too slow to produce for a world now locked in total war. From this need, the MG42 was born in 1942. Forged not with elegance but with brutal efficiency, it was faster to build, faster to fire, and terrifying to face. Its steel was stamped instead of milled. Its tolerances were wider, allowing it to keep working when clogged with mud or blood. Most of all, its rate of fire, 1,200 to 1,500 rounds per minute, was almost twice that of its American or British counterparts. The result was not just another German weapon, it was a revolution. To understand why soldiers feared it so deeply, one must imagine standing in its path. A steady machine gun, like the American Browning, had a rhythm you could anticipate: thud, thud, thud. But the MG42 was different. It was a continuous roar, like the tearing of the earth itself. No time to think, no time to move, just a wall of lead that seemed to erase the very idea of survival. This is the story of how the MG42 became the most feared weapon of the war, how it dominated the battlefield, not only with firepower, but with fear itself, and how, despite its reputation as too perfect for war, it carried within it one flaw, one weakness that may have been the only reason it did not change the entire course of World War II. In the years leading up to the Second World War, Germany invested heavily in weapons that reflected its vision of modern warfare. The German leadership believed that future battles would be won not just by courage or numbers, but by technology and speed. Their ambition was to field weapons that were versatile, reliable, and devastating. At first, they thought they had achieved this goal with the MG34. The MG34, introduced in the mid-1930s, was considered revolutionary. It was the first true general-purpose machine gun, capable of filling multiple battlefield roles. On a bipod, it acted as a light support weapon. On a tripod with optical sights, it became a heavy machine gun capable of long-range precision fire. In theory, this gave the German army a single weapon that could replace multiple specialized guns. It fired at an impressive rate of 800 to 900 rounds per minute, faster than most Allied weapons of the time. It was a marvel of engineering, admired for its craftsmanship, precision, and adaptability. But therein lay the problem. The MG34 was almost too perfect. Its internal parts were finely machined, requiring skilled labor and expensive materials. Production was slow and costly at a time when Germany needed weapons in enormous numbers. Worse still, it proved vulnerable to the elements. Dust and mud clogged its tight tolerances. In the harsh winter of the Eastern Front, it could jam at the very moment it was needed most. In the burning deserts of North Africa, sand found its way into the weapon, rendering it unreliable. In total war, perfection was not defined by elegance, it was defined by efficiency and survival. By 1941, as the war expanded into the vast fields of the Soviet Union and the deserts of Africa, the German High Command realized they needed something different. They needed a machine gun that could be produced quickly by less skilled workers in factories under constant pressure from Allied bombing. They needed a weapon that could keep firing even when covered in dirt, that could be handed to young recruits with minimal training and still unleash devastation. The answer came in 1942. The MG42. The MG42 was born out of necessity, but what emerged went far beyond expectations. It was not polished, not refined, not a work of art like the MG34. Instead, it was a weapon stripped down to its brutal essence. Its parts were made of stamped and welded steel, drastically cutting production time. A single MG42 could be manufactured in less than half the time required to build an MG34. Looser tolerances meant it resisted mud, sand, and ice far better than its predecessor. For Germany, now locked in a war of attrition, this was a breakthrough. But the real shock lay in its performance. The MG42 fired at a staggering 1,200 to 1,500 rounds per minute. To put this into perspective, the standard American Browning M1919 fired around 500 to 600 rounds per minute. The British Bren gun fired even slower at 500 rounds per minute, though it was prized for accuracy. The Soviet DP-27 fired about 500 to 550. The MG42 doubled, even tripled these rates. It unleashed 20 to 25 bullets in a single second. This speed produced a sound unlike any other on the battlefield. Instead of the steady measured bursts of Allied machine guns, the MG42 emitted a single ripping roar, so continuous that soldiers could not count the shots. This terrifying noise earned it the nickname buzzsaw. For those who heard it for the first time, it seemed almost inhuman, like a monstrous force that defied reason. The Germans also equipped the MG42 with a quick-change barrel system, another vital improvement. At such extreme rates of fire, the barrel could overheat in seconds. But the designers built in a simple lever that allowed a trained crew to swap a red-hot barrel for a cool one in under 20 seconds. With multiple spare barrels on hand, an MG42 team could maintain near-constant fire. This capability was unmatched at the time. Allied guns often had to pause for cooling or reloading, but the MG42 could roar on, drowning the battlefield in steel. The MG42 was not just a replacement for the MG34. It was a transformation in design philosophy. Where the MG34 had been built like a fine watch, the MG42 was built like a hammer, cheap, fast, brutal, and effective. It was the embodiment of industrial warfare, where function outweighed form, and where speed of production meant the difference between holding the line or losing the war. By the summer of 1942, the MG42 began to reach German units on the front. Reports from soldiers confirmed what the designers had hoped. It was devastatingly reliable, easy to maintain, and terrifyingly lethal. In the forests of Russia, in the deserts of North Africa, and later on the beaches of Normandy, its presence was unmistakable. Allied soldiers learned to identify it instantly by its sound alone. One American veteran later recalled, "The first time I heard it, I thought the sky itself had split open. You could not tell where the bullets were landing because it all blended into one tearing scream. Men would hug the ground and pray." The MG42 had arrived, and with it, the balance of fear shifted. For Germany, it was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of their tactical philosophy. The machine gun was not just another tool in the squad. It was the very heart of the squad. Every soldier carried ammunition, spotted targets, or protected the gun team. In this way, the MG42 was not only a weapon of war, but the core of German infantry doctrine. And so, from the ashes of the MG34's shortcomings, the MG42 was born, a weapon designed for total war. It was efficient to the point of horror, and it would soon earn a reputation as both the most feared and the most infamous machine gun of the entire conflict. To understand why the MG42 became infamous, one must imagine standing on the receiving end of its fire. A battlefield in the Second World War was already a place of chaos and terror. Artillery thundered, mortars whistled, and rifles cracked. Yet when the MG42 opened up, everything else seemed to fade. Its sound dominated the air, a ripping roar that drowned out the shouts of officers and the pounding of boots. It was as if the battlefield itself had turned hostile. Unlike slower Allied machine guns, which gave off a steady rhythm, the MG42 produced what soldiers described as an unbroken scream. In the words of one American veteran, it was not a gun, it was a chainsaw made of bullets. You did not hear shots, you just heard the tearing of life away from you. That psychological impact was as deadly as the bullets themselves. Entire platoons could be frozen in place by a single MG42 nest. Men who would normally crawl forward under fire found themselves pinned, afraid to even lift their heads. Officers urged them on, but the tearing roar made every movement feel suicidal. Training manuals warned American and British soldiers about the MG42's psychological effect, even playing recordings during drills. Yet no amount of preparation could erase the instinctive fear it created. Hearing it in training was one thing. Hearing it while comrades fell beside you was another. On the Eastern Front, Soviet infantry often halted their advances the moment the MG42 announced its presence. Reports from the Red Army describe waves of men forced flat to the ground, unable to advance until artillery or tanks silenced the gun. In Normandy, American units sometimes spent hours trying to flank or destroy a single MG42 nest hidden in the hedgerows. The price of attacking such a position was always blood. The effectiveness of the MG42 was not just in its firepower, but in its role as the centerpiece of German infantry tactics. A standard German squad of 10 men was built around one machine gun. The gunner and his assistant carried the weapon, barrels, and tools. Other squad members hauled ammunition belts, spotted targets, and defended the crew. The MG42 was not support for the riflemen. The riflemen supported the MG42. In defense, the MG42 was placed to cover wide-open fields with overlapping arcs of fire. Any advancing force would find itself cut down before reaching the wire. In offense, it laid down a blanket of suppressive fire, allowing the squad to maneuver. On a bipod, it was mobile enough to be carried quickly from one position to another. On a heavy tripod, it became a long-range weapon capable of accurate fire beyond 1,000 meters. This adaptability made it both versatile and terrifying. The sheer volume of bullets it produced meant that even without perfect accuracy, it could saturate an area with deadly force. A burst might cut through several men in seconds. Survivors often remembered the sound more than the sight, describing it as a ripping noise that left them paralyzed. In combat, hesitation could be fatal, and the MG42 induced hesitation on a scale few weapons in history ever achieved. But the horror of the MG42 was not reserved only for the enemy. The men who fired it bore their own burden. The gun weighed over 25 pounds, and with spare barrels, ammunition, and tripods, the load carried by a gun team could exceed 100 pounds. Under fire, changing barrels in under 20 seconds was not just a skill, but a matter of life or death. If the barrel overheated and seized, the squad could be overrun. The stress was relentless. For the gunners, every burst of fire announced their position. Allied soldiers quickly learned that the machine gun was the most dangerous threat on the battlefield, and so it became their primary target. Snipers, mortars, and artillery all hunted MG42 teams. A gunner who opened fire knew that within seconds enemy fire would pour down on him. Some described it as both an honor and a death sentence. To wield the MG42 was to command immense power, but also to carry the heaviest risk. There was also the moral weight. The MG42 did not just kill, it erased. Advancing soldiers could fall in heaps, torn apart before they even realized they were under fire. German gunners sometimes admitted that its efficiency was unsettling, that it turned battle into a mechanical process of destruction. For some, the memory of what they had done with the MG42 haunted them long after the war ended. One veteran recalled, "It was too fast, too much. You did not see a man fall. You saw him disappear into the roar. Even as the one pulling the trigger, you felt it was wrong." In this way, the MG42 embodied both power and horror. It gave German squads the ability to dominate larger forces. It shaped battles not only with bullets, but with fear. Yet it also consumed those who used it, turning gunners into targets and leaving scars on their minds that outlasted the war itself. The MG42 was not just a weapon, it was a psychological trap. For the enemy, It created paralysis. For its users, it demanded everything: strength, speed, and often their lives. This duality of power and price is what gave the MG42 its infamous reputation. By the time Allied troops stormed Normandy, the mere sound of the MG42 was enough to chill entire companies. Soldiers described the air itself as dangerous, as if sound alone could kill. To many, it felt less like fighting another man and more like fighting the machine itself. That sense of inhuman power, of being hunted by a weapon rather than an enemy, was what made the MG42 truly terrifying. And yet, for all its dominance, the MG42 had flaws that would keep it from rewriting history entirely. But those flaws would only become clear after its reign of fear had already left its mark on the fields of Europe and beyond. The terror of the MG42 was so great that even propaganda could not erase it. The United States military released training films telling recruits that the weapon's bark was worse than its bite, that its high rate of fire wasted ammunition and reduced accuracy. But soldiers who faced it on the front lines knew better. Accuracy did not matter when 20 bullets tore through the air every second. Ammunition consumption meant little when one gun could stop an entire company in its tracks. The propaganda was meant to calm nerves, but on the battlefield, the truth roared louder than any film. Men learned to recognize the MG42's ripping scream instantly, and once they did, they knew their chances of survival had just diminished. No slogan or speech could stand against that sound. The price of the MG42 did not end when the battle was over. For many of the men who carried it, the war followed them home in memories that would not fade. The gun's terrifying speed stripped combat of any sense of honor. Killing became a mechanical act, performed at the pull of a trigger, with dozens of lives lost in the blink of an eye. Veterans who once believed they were fighting for their homeland often confessed that the MG42 made them feel like mere operators of a machine of death. One German gunner later recalled sitting by his weapon after a fight, staring at the smoking barrel and wondering how many lives had ended in that short burst. He said, "It was too fast, too easy. The men fell before I even saw their faces, and I carried that with me long after the war was gone." This emotional burden was mirrored on the Allied side. Survivors of MG42 ambushes described an almost supernatural terror. They remembered the sound long after the war, a ripping roar that made their hearts race decades later. Some admitted that the first few seconds of an MG42 burst could send them diving for cover even in peacetime, when there was no enemy and no battlefield. For these men, the war never truly ended. There was also the cost in resources. An MG42 burned through ammunition at a rate that strained Germany's already pressured supply lines. It took vast quantities of rounds to keep one gun team firing in a prolonged battle. Each barrel change consumed precious seconds, and each belt of ammunition required entire soldiers to carry it. The weapon's hunger for supplies was a constant reminder that nothing in war came without sacrifice. The Germans accepted this trade-off because the MG42 gave them control. Control over ground, control over movement, control over the minds of their enemies. But in seeking that control, they lost something themselves. Gunners were no longer ordinary infantry. They were specialists, targets, and often martyrs. To wield the MG42 was to shoulder a burden that few men could carry for long. The haunting truth is that the MG42's deadliness did not discriminate. It consumed enemies, yes, but it also consumed its own. It left young men broken in body and in spirit, and it left scars across the memory of a generation, scars that proved once again that in war, the most perfect weapons often demand the most terrible prices. When Allied soldiers first encountered the MG42, many realized immediately that they were facing something entirely different from their own machine guns. For the United States, the workhorse of infantry, support was the Browning M1919. It was rugged and reliable, but it fired at only 500 to 600 rounds per minute, less than half the speed of the MG42. It was also heavier, less mobile, and required more effort to maintain. On the battlefield, this meant that the M1919 could provide steady fire, but it could not hope to match the overwhelming torrent unleashed by a German gun team. The British Bren gun was another mainstay of Allied forces. Loved for its reliability and accuracy, the Bren was an excellent weapon in controlled bursts. Yet it suffered from a critical limitation, its 30-round box magazine. In combat, this meant constant reloading, a pause that could prove fatal when facing an MG42 fed by long belts of ammunition. A Bren gunner could fire with precision, but a German gunner could drown the battlefield in steel before the Bren team finished a reload. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union deployed the DP-27, a weapon known for its distinctive pan-shaped magazine. Like the Bren, it was durable and easy to maintain, but its magazine emptied in seconds under sustained fire. Soviet infantry often found themselves pinned by MG42s that seemed to fire endlessly while their own weapons fell silent during reloads. The psychological imbalance this created was enormous. Only one Allied weapon could claim to rival the MG42 in terms of sustained firepower, the water-cooled Browning M1917. With its cooling jacket, the M1917 could fire for long periods without overheating, something even the MG42 could not always achieve. But it came with severe drawbacks. The weapon was bulky, required a full crew to operate, and was far less mobile. While it could match the MG42 in a prepared defensive position, it could not follow infantry through the chaos of mobile warfare. In practice, this imbalance meant that German infantry often held the advantage in small unit engagements. A single MG42 nest could pin down an entire Allied platoon, forcing commanders to call in artillery, mortars, or tanks just to silence one gun. The disparity in firepower shaped tactics. Allied soldiers had to rely on smoke, flanking maneuvers, and overwhelming numbers to overcome the German machine guns. Even then, the price was often steep. The Allies tried to compensate with doctrine rather than hardware. They emphasized combined arms, ensuring that infantry never attacked without support from artillery or armor. They drilled soldiers to stay calm under the terrifying roar of the MG42, and they reminded men that despite its speed, the weapon consumed ammunition at a tremendous rate, meaning that German gunners could not sustain fire forever. These reassurances helped, but they did not erase the fact that, in direct comparison, the MG42 was unmatched in raw suppressive power. Ultimately, the difference was not just technical, but psychological. Allied guns fired in rhythms soldiers could learn to anticipate. The MG42, by contrast, sounded less like a machine gun and more like a force of nature. Its roar carried across valleys and hedgerows, a reminder that death was always just one trigger pull away. For the men who faced it, no weapon on their side could match that combination of speed, sound, and terror. By the end of the Second World War, the MG42 had already left an indelible mark on history. More than 400,000 units were produced, scattered across every front where German forces fought. Its legacy did not end in 1945. In many ways, the MG42 was not simply a weapon of its time. It was the blueprint for the machine guns that would shape the modern battlefield. The weapon's roller-locked recoil system became a foundation for post-war designs. When West Germany rearmed during the Cold War, it did not discard the MG42. It refined it. The result was the MG3, rechambered to fire NATO's standard 7.62 mm cartridge. This updated version carried the same terrifying rate of fire and remained in service for decades, not only with Germany, but with armies across Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. To this day, many nations still deploy descendants of the MG42, a testament to the soundness of its design. The MG42's influence extended far beyond Europe. The American M60 machine gun, introduced in the 1950s, borrowed heavily from its mechanisms. The Belgian FN-MAG, one of the most successful machine guns of the 20th century, was likewise inspired by the German design. Even the Soviet Union's PK series incorporated ideas rooted in the MG42. In a sense, soldiers in Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East, and Africa all faced echoes of the weapon first unleashed in 1942. Yet the MG42's legacy was not purely technical. It left behind a psychological and moral imprint that haunted veterans and reshaped military thinking. Allied troops remembered the weapon as the single most fearsome gun they ever encountered. For decades after the war, veterans described its sound in memoirs and interviews, often shuddering at the memory. To them, the MG42 symbolized the industrialization of killing, the reduction of battle into a mechanical process where men were cut down by machines too fast to resist. This moral dimension troubled even those who had used it. Some German gunners admitted after the war that the MG42 disturbed them. Its efficiency stripped combat of any illusion of honor. One veteran confessed, "It was not fighting, it was slaughter, and the worst part was how easy it became." That sense of unease followed them long after they put down the weapon. For historians, the MG42 stands as a lesson in the dangers of unchecked technological pursuit. It was created to solve practical problems: production speed, reliability, battlefield dominance. But in solving those problems, it created something more terrifying, a weapon that could change the psychology of combat itself. The MG42 demonstrated that fear could be as powerful a weapon as steel and fire. It was proof that technology could reach a point where efficiency became indistinguishable from horror. In the decades after 1945, peace movements and veterans groups often pointed to the MG42 as a symbol of why the world must resist another global war. Its sound became shorthand for the brutality of mechanized conflict. In Germany, discussions of the MG42 carried an unease that lingered long after the war, as the nation reckoned with its role in unleashing such terror. Even today, military scholars study the MG42 not only for its engineering brilliance, but also for its tactical and psychological impact. It shifted the focus of infantry warfare from the individual rifleman to the machine gun team. It proved that one weapon, properly designed, could alter the balance of power far beyond its numbers. And it reminded the world that sometimes the most dangerous inventions are those that work too well. The MG42 remains both a marvel and a warning. A marvel because of its durability, its influence on generations of weapons, and its place in the evolution of military doctrine. A warning because it showed how human ingenuity, when devoted to destruction, can create tools that haunt not only the battlefield, but the conscience of humanity itself. By the close of the 20th century, the MG42's descendants were still firing across conflicts around the globe. But for those who first heard its roar in the fields of Normandy, the forests of Russia, or the deserts of North Africa, the MG42 would forever be more than just a weapon. It was a sound, a fear, and a memory that never died. The MG42 was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of a philosophy that placed firepower above all else. For the German army, it became the beating heart of the squad, the weapon around which everything else revolved. For the Allies, it was a nightmare, an ever-present reminder that the enemy could dominate the battlefield with a single burst of fire. Its roar was feared in Normandy, in the frozen East, and in the deserts of Africa. And long after the war ended, its echoes remained in the memories of those who had survived it. Technically, the MG42 reshaped the future of warfare. Its roller-locked system and high rate of fire inspired weapons on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Its descendants, the MG3, the M60, the FN MAG, the PK series, served in wars across the globe for decades. In this way, the MG42 did not die in 1945. It lived on, evolving and influencing battlefields far removed from its origin. But the true legacy of the MG42 cannot be measured in steel and design. It must be measured in the human cost. Allied veterans remembered the fear it inspired as vividly as the wounds it inflicted. German gunners remembered the crushing weight of responsibility, the knowledge that once they opened fire, they became the most hunted men on the field. And both sides remembered the sound, that tearing, ripping roar that seemed to erase hope in an instant. In World War II, the MG42 shaped battles with sheer speed and suppression. In World War II, it broke the courage of men with nothing more than sound and fire. And in World War II, it stood as a warning that when technology becomes too perfect at killing, humanity itself is diminished. The MG42 was efficient, devastating, and unforgettable. But perhaps that is why so many called it too perfect for war. A weapon that delivered so much destruction so quickly, left no room for anything else, no room for mercy, no room for hesitation, no room for survival. Today, historians and veterans alike remind us of its dual legacy. It was an engineering marvel, yes, but it was also a symbol of how far mankind is willing to go in pursuit of power on the battlefield. It proved that sometimes the most dangerous creations are not the ones that fail, but the ones that succeed beyond measure. As we reflect on the past, the MG42 forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Human ingenuity can build wonders, but when that creativity is turned toward destruction, the results can be monstrous. The MG42 remains both a marvel and a warning, a reminder that peace is fragile and that the tools of war, once unleashed, can scar generations. So when we speak of the MG42, we should remember not only its speed, its roar, and its engineering brilliance, but also the lives it consumed and the fear it spread. Its story is not only about Germany, or the Allies, or the battlefields of Europe. It is about us all. It is about the choices humanity makes when it builds weapons too perfect for war.